If you do have good metabolic health, you probably just don't realise because you feel good, you've got plenty of energy, your digestion's good, your heart feels good, probably your blood pressure and all those things are good. So if you've got good metabolic health, you're able to function what we would call normally, whatever normal is.
Yes, at peak performance.
But 88% of Americans, now it's an American statistic, but 88% of Americans have got metabolic dysfunction. So that means 88% of people in America, their metabolic system, all those internal processes, are not operating efficiently or effectively. So
and they may be suffering from what you're going to go through.
That's it. And so you might say, well, so what?
It's so what?
Okay.
I've got lousy metabolic health, so what? And welcome back to The Peaks Life. I'm Mike Warren, this is Lynn Fernie. You're joining us for bite-sized chunks of wellness wisdom. And today I'm going to say serious wellness wisdom.
Serious
wellness.
Not
Not the fun, coffee,
not the frivolous.
fats, frivolous, ice baths, sun, all the fun stuff. Today we've got a serious subject. I think it's something that a lot of people may not be fully aware of the importance of, but I think it's a worthwhile subject. So we're going to talk about metabolic health.
That sounds fancy.
Good, because you're going to demystify it. So let's start there. Let's first of all start with what is metabolic health, so those people tuning in get a sense of whether they want to tune out and turn off and go away and do something else, or whether it's important. So scare us with the details of metabolic health, Lynn Fernie.
What is it? So I think you hear the term metabolic health. We also hear the term metabolic conditions, and we hear terms like metabolism. And people perhaps don't really truly what they are, because what we're talking about is we're talking about the systems and processes that go on inside of us.
Okay.
All right. So we're talking about the things that basically keep us alive. And we don't see those. We see what's on the outside. We see our hair colour, we see our skin, we see how clear our eyes are, we see our body size and shape. And they may give us indications of metabolic health, but it doesn't really tell us a lot about those functions and processes that are happening day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute, and keeping us alive and in really good condition. So, we're talking about the transport of the important hormones around the body. We're talking about how the body takes up its fuel. So when we eat, whether it's fats or whether it's carbohydrates, it's how the body takes up glucose or how the body makes ketones and uses them. It's how the body processes those things. It's how the hormones get transported around the body. So if I'm a woman and I'm producing female sex hormones, am I producing enough? And are they getting to all the right places? If you're a man and you're producing testosterone, again, are you producing enough? And is it getting to the right places? Is it getting to the muscles to allow you to build muscle? Or are you wasting? So it's all of the things around our internal health, the transport of those hormones that really keeps us ticking along, literally keeps our heart ticking, keeps our heart ticking at the right pace, gets the blood pumping around the body, and as I said, transports those hormones into the right places so they can do all of their various functions.
All right, so it's a lot of internal functions that we don't necessarily see the evidence externally, so therefore we tend to turn a blind eye. If we can't see it, we don't worry about it. We do know there's 5 areas we consider with metabolic health, and it's important to understand the levels and maintain the balance. Maybe if you walk through each of those 5 areas, give us a sense of what that particular aspect is and understanding sort of how it impacts the body and maybe the balance and the levels.
I tell you what I'm going to do first though. I'm going to give you a statistic and tell you what happens if you don't have good metabolic health.
Is it scary?
It's definitely scary.
Good, I love a scary one. The listeners like to be scared by you.
So let's change it around.
I get to be scared by you every day.
Let's change it around a bit, Mike. Let's talk about what happens if you don't. Because if you do have good metabolic health, you probably just don't realise because you feel good, you've got plenty of energy, your digestion's good, your heart feels good, probably your blood pressure and all those things are good. So if you've got good metabolic health, you're able to function what we would call normally, whatever normal is.
Yes, at peak performance.
But 88% of Americans, now it's an American statistic, but 88% of Americans have got metabolic dysfunction. So that means 88% of people in America, their metabolic system, all those internal processes, are not operating efficiently or effectively. So
and they may be suffering from what you're going to go through.
That's it. And so you might say, well,
So
what?
It's so what?
Okay.
I've got lousy metabolic health, so what?
It's not perfect,
but there's
so
a
what?
big, serious list of so whats, isn't there?
There's a real serious. Now, the top one, and it's of interest to a lot of people, is obesity.
Okay.
You know, we know that obesity is rising. We know that obesity represents about 42% of the population in the US. We know that childhood obesity globally is already at about 20%, with some of our developed countries around about 30, 35, 40%.
Yes.
So we know that there's a very large proportion of the world's population who are obese. There's an even bigger number that are overweight. So if you put together the obesity and the overweight,
staggering statistic.
It's a staggering statistic. Now, if you don't have good metabolic health, then you are at very high risk of becoming overweight and or obese.
And conversely, if you're trying to lose weight and become less obese or less overweight and into the ideal size and shape, then metabolic health must be one of those things you must consider. Otherwise, all the other areas you're working on are going to be, fraught with barriers if your metabolic health isn't where it needs to be.
That's it. They go hand in hand. So
absolutely.
That's probably the first one.
Good.
The second one is probably type 2 diabetes, because again, we know that if we stick with America for our statistics today, because there's a lot of stats come out of America, so we know that 1 in 3 people already has type 2 diabetes, and even more have got pre-diabetes, which means they're just in that early phase or just about to get type 2 diabetes.
Knocking on the door of type 2.
Knocking on the door of type 2. And just think about that. Type 2 diabetes, means that you are going to be suffering ill health and ill health effects for the rest of your life.
Yes.
Unless you do something about it.
Absolutely.
So type 2 diabetes would be the next one. The next one would be heart disease. So heart disease and stroke. If your metabolic health isn't where it needs to be, they are definitely at risk of being affected. So we don't think of these as being metabolic conditions, but essentially they are. So the next one would be cancer. And again, another statistic,
Great.
1 in 3
There's not much of the body left at the moment. This metabolic health is kind of affecting everything, isn't it, really?
It is. Well, if you think about it, at least 1 in 3 Americans is obese.
Yes.
That's linked to metabolic health. At least 1 in 3 Americans gets heart disease. That's linked to metabolic health. And at least 1 in 3 Americans gets cancer. That's linked to metabolic health. So there will be some overlap, but we're talking about virtually the whole population. And as I said, 88% of Americans have got metabolic dysfunction.
Which plays
so
into
do you
those
see the
stats.
link?
Yep.
Metabolic dysfunction, and we've got a lot of people who are obese, type 2 diabetics, and they've got heart disease.
Yes.
So this metabolic issue is responsible for all of those conditions. And then I can go on, because it's also responsible for neurological conditions.
Wow.
It is potentially a contributor to kidney disease.
Okay.
And there's more. There's things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is obviously unique to women.
Yes.
But there are a number of other conditions, and we could sit and talk about all the conditions that could frighten the life out of people, literally, with all the things that you're at risk of if your metabolic health isn't where it needs to be.
So it's pretty compelling to think that there are probably, you've listed at least 10 very significant health problems that are very prevalent in America and in a lot of Western societies that we need to really consider. Okay, we are at high risk of being predisposed to those if we don't at least understand our metabolic health and then take steps to minimise the potential impact if we're out of whack. All right, so we've got the scary bit. We now understand 88% of Americans have a metabolic health condition. What is metabolic health? What are the elements that feed into it? Then, more importantly, what can we do to make sure our metabolic health stays where it needs to be?
Yeah, and I think if you're tuning in for another country and you say, oh, look, I'm wherever I am in the world, and those stats are America. What we know is that other developed and developing countries, so it's not only developed countries, this is really worldwide, the stats are increasing.
Yes.
So, most countries, I would suggest, are well above the 30-40% mark.
Yes.
And they're well on the way to catching America up. In fact, America sort of plateaued a bit. Other countries are catching up very, very fast.
So it's still a concern.
It's still a concern. Doesn't matter where you are. So there's 5 ways that we can look at the body's systems and get an indication of how our metabolic health is doing. So it's really good to have a look at these. And, if you're somebody who's really interested in your health and your wellness, and, perhaps you want to set yourself a benchmark because you want to make some improvements, great to get these measured, because then you can make some changes, and we'll talk about what those changes are. You can then come back to those measurements
and have a look again
and see the difference. So this is actually one of those things that you can measure and you can improve, and then you can track and see your progress over time. So the first one's blood sugar.
Right.
So blood sugar, basically when we think about blood sugar, what is happening with blood sugar is if we take in carbohydrates particularly, then the body's got to use those carbohydrates. It's got to turn them into glucose, and then it's got to find a way to use that glucose to feed our cells and give us energy.
Yes.
All right. So what happens is the pancreas releases insulin. So when we take in carbohydrate, we turn that into glucose, we get insulin released, and insulin basically is the thing that allows that glucose to get into the cells and be used.
Right.
So if we don't have insulin, if we don't produce it, the glucose can't get into our cells and it doesn't produce any energy.
Right.
So remembering that glucose, if you're a carbohydrate eater, is your fuel source.
Yes.
So we're feeding the body fuel, but if we don't have insulin, we can't use it.
Yes.
So it's like putting fuel into your car and then having a hole somewhere in the pipes and it all just comes out.
Absolutely.
So basically, the problem, if our blood sugar level rises, which is an indicator of poor metabolic health. So if the blood sugar level rises, then we've got to produce more insulin. So the body will try and do that, and it will keep pumping insulin out, and then it will keep working harder and harder. So if I increase my carbohydrate and glucose levels and I give my body more and more and more carbohydrate, the pancreas has to work harder and harder and harder to produce effectively like an equal amount of insulin. So as your carbohydrates go up, your body must produce more insulin to handle that amount of carbohydrates and to be able to use it and then store it in the muscles, to keep you going through the day.
Okay.
So what happens essentially is you get to the point where you've produced so much glucose, so much insulin, the body starts to become resistant. It's a bit like, can you imagine somebody saying, I'm full.
Yeah, I'm full.
I'm full. My cells are full. You have forced glucose into my cells.
Yes.
Man, stop. I can't take any more.
Yes.
And that is literally what every little cell in your body is doing.
Screaming.
If you are putting in too much carbohydrate, you're constantly eating carbs and sugar and all those very, very high glycemic carbohydrates. So the white bread, the flour, the sugar, all the refined foods, the processed foods, your cells are just going stop, 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 stop. And then they have their own defense mechanism, which basically says, we've had enough. We're now not going to be sensitive to that insulin. So that's when we develop what we call insulin resistance. So even though we've produced a lot of it, because we've increased our carbohydrates and glucose and produced more insulin, the cells are blocking it. So we get this condition called insulin resistance, and we can't use the glucose that our body has.
Interesting.
Even worse, we go another step further, and that's when we're talking about, type 2 diabetes developing. We go a step further, and we actually just wear out the poor little pancreas. So that poor little pancreas is sitting in there, and it's been pumping out insulin. It's been working 10 times as hard as it should have been.
It goes on long service.
And eventually it just says,
enough.
I'm out.
Yep.
I'm burned out. I'm fatigued.
Yep.
And then it switches off, and then you've got no insulin. So then you've got glucose coming in, you've got no insulin, and you're diabetic.
Right.
So if we measure our blood sugar level, and we do that by measuring our fasting blood glucose or even our non-fasting blood glucose, we should be able to see, are we within the guidelines?
Yes.
And if we're keeping it within the guidelines, then that's the first indicator that our diabetes risk is minimal. Okay. If we start to see blood sugar or blood glucose go up, and if it remains high over a long period of time and starts to get higher and higher, then we're increasing our risk for pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes and all of these other conditions that we talked about. So that's probably the first and one of the biggest indicators of metabolic health.
Fantastic and great, a great simplistic explanation of why the pancreas goes on strike.
Yes.
And when you scoff your face full of excess carbohydrates and sugars. All right, that's the first indicator. What's the second indicator of metabolic health?
Second indicator is triglycerides. So when people talk about blood cholesterol levels, they tend to talk about two things, triglycerides and cholesterol itself.
Yes.
Now, there's been a lot of confusion over the past 30, 40, 50 years about whether high triglycerides are good or bad and whether high cholesterol levels are good or bad. And you will still see a lot of debate around. But what we do know is if you have excessively high triglycerides and you're a carbohydrate eater, then you're likely to be suffering some metabolic conditions.
Okay.
All right, so that's the next one, very easy. I'm not going to talk too much about triglycerides. They have a very important function in the body, but if they get too high, then again, we're starting to see potentially disease on its way.
And it's one of those levels we can measure and we can track and manage the triglyceride levels.
So just talking about the first two, the blood sugar and the triglycerides. Blood sugar is very easy to measure. You can pop along to your chemist or pharmacist or your doctor and they'll just do a pinprick test on your finger and they will just literally there and then on the spot give you your blood sugar level or your blood glucose level. You can get blood drawn and they'll give you an indicator of what your blood glucose has been over the last few months.
Yes.
So that's a more accurate indicator because it's not just taking a spot measurement, it's telling you if your blood sugar's been elevated over the last 3 months.
Yes.
Or you can even buy yourself a kit, a blood glucose measurement kit, and there you just simply prick your finger every day with a special little device. You get a stick, get a drop of blood, put it on the stick, and it will instantly give you your
Gotta
blood
love
glucose.
technology.
Gotta love technology. Triglycerides are a bit more tricky. You can't do that at home. That one you do have to go and get blood drawn and you can get some blood work done to tell you what your triglycerides are. Easy test and good to see what the level is.
All right, that's the first two. Number 3, metabolic health indicator.
Next one is cholesterol, and I don't want to go into the whole cholesterol myth at this point other than to say cholesterol is not bad. Cholesterol is actually really good. If we didn't have cholesterol, we would actually fall apart. It performs a really important function in every single one of our cells, and it's required by every single cell. So if you have been one of those people eating low fat for years because you think that fat is bad and it causes cholesterol, please read up on this because it's not bad. You need cholesterol.
You have been misled.
Want fat. You want fat to produce cholesterol. In the body, what does cholesterol do? It basically takes hormones and it transports them around the body to where they're needed and where they're used.
Yes.
And remember, I'm not just talking about female hormones, I'm talking about sleep hormones, wake hormones, things like adrenaline, cortisol. I'm talking about the sex hormones, talking about the estrogen, the testosterone. So all of the various different hormones, the insulin.
It's the Uber of hormones.
It is the Uber of hormones. It is
we
indeed.
We need the Uber service out there, otherwise we don't get the hormones.
So if we don't have the LDL cholesterol, then we've got nothing to transport hormones around. That's the LDL. The HDL cholesterol, that's the high density lipoprotein cholesterol. What that does, that basically goes around the body and picks up all the used hormones. So once they've been used and sort of thrown away, like the packaging's been used and thrown away, the HDL will go around the body, pick them all up. So it's like the garbage wagon. Picks up the used hormones, puts them in the back, and then transports them back to the liver to be reprocessed and eliminated from the body. So without high density lipoprotein, HDL cholesterol, again, we're not going to pick up all of those waste hormones and dispose of them. And can you imagine what's happening if you don't get your garbage delivery, your garbage pickup service every week?
It gets a bit smelly in there.
Your garbage builds up and it gets smelly.
Yes.
And that's what happens. So we need HDL, and we know now it's a very protective type of cholesterol. It cleans out the blood vessels.
Yes.
Performs a really important sort of sweeping mechanism. So especially in the cardiovascular system, it keeps those blood vessels nice and clean and clear and avoids plaque being built up. So we really do need the HDL. So when you measure HDL by getting, again, blood work done, when you measure HDL cholesterol, if it's low, that's a bad sign. We want HDL to be high.
Which, unfortunately, we have been led to believe over the years that high cholesterol is a problem. And we now understand that that research and that popular belief is not where it needs to be. So there's a lot of people out there who would be sort of saying, hang on a second, that's a bit different to what I've been brought up on. But the research suggests that high cholesterol isn't as bad as we thought. And we need the Ubers and we need the garbage collectors of the hormones to make sure our body's healthy.
We do, and again, a small digression here. Many people do suffer with low HDL cholesterol.
Yes.
And if you go and see your medical professional, you have blood work done and your cholesterol, your HDL cholesterol specifically is low, what your GP is likely to do is to give you statins. And statins is that it will raise your HDL cholesterol.
Yes.
But it will also give you many other potential disease risks. It increases heart disease risk, increases the risk of stroke, and I could go on for a long time.
Quick fix medication.
So don't be tempted with statins. They really are a dangerous drug, but the GPs get paid a significant amount of money to prescribe them. So avoid that one. We'll tell you how to fix HDL in a second.
All right, number 4.
Number 4. Now, number 4 is interesting because this is a really easy one to measure, and it's your blood pressure.
Easy.
All right, so really easy. Go along to your medical professional or get one of those little, sleeves that you can use at home and measure your own.
The local gym usually has them.
Yeah, that's it. Go and measure your blood pressure.
Yes.
And look for that being in the normal range. So again, if your blood pressure is high, it's an indicator that your heart is having to work a lot harder to pump the blood around your body. So it means it's meeting resistance. Maybe, you may have clogged arteries, you may have other respiratory issues. It could be a whole host of reasons, but blood pressure being elevated for a long period of time is not good because it really is making the heart work very hard. So we've already got the pancreas working hard, we've now got the heart working hard, we've put stress on the liver because we haven't given it any HDL cholesterol, and we're starting now to build up a picture of all of our internal organs
Under pressure
and stress.
All right, lucky last.
Lucky last is another super easy one to measure, and it's waist circumference, your waist size.
Okay, it's interesting.
So literally, and you've probably seen pictures about this where you see the pictures of people who look pear-shaped
Yes.
and people who look apple-shaped.
Yes.
And that's because the bigger our waist is in relation to the rest of our body especially, the more at risk we are of metabolic conditions. And that's because when we pack on fat, if we've got metabolic syndrome or if we've got poor metabolic health, the fat goes around the waist. And so hence we get that apple shape. It's not our arms and legs.
Yep.
It's the waist that gets it first.
Yep.
And you see it. Everybody points to their tummy. I've packed on a few pounds.
Yes.
They pat their tummy.
Yes.
And so that basically that white fat that's sitting around the midriff, the midline, is sitting around all of our internal organs. So it's sitting around, the heart and the liver and the kidneys. And just imagine they're being surrounded in white fat. It's not very healthy.
Agreed.
So again, it's an indicator that we've got too much fat around our belly, and that's an unhealthy type of fat, and it's coming from that metabolic syndrome.
All right, so we've got these 5 indicators of metabolic health, and what we're looking to do is to measure them and manage them and keep them within the recommended areas. And then if we do that effectively, we will have good metabolic health. If we fail to do that and we go outside of those in any of those areas, we could be predisposed to all those conditions you talked about earlier.
Exactly right.
All right, last piece of the puzzle is then how do we keep those indicators within the balanced areas we need? What are some of the steps we can take?
Yeah, good. And it's not only about keeping them in the balanced levels, it's also about how do we reverse
Of course,
the conditions.
yes.
So if you've got high blood sugar,
If you're one of the 88%,
if you're one of the
listening in with
88%,
the dodgy metabolic health,
there's some really good news. I've given you some horrible, fearful news.
you do that often.
And I love to scaremonger. No, I don't.
You love to be
I
realistic
do love to scare people.
and honest.
I do. The reason I like to scare people is because I think people need a wake-up call. This is serious, people.
Yes.
We are dealing with life-threatening conditions here. And the great news is they are all reversible.
Yes.
So even people who've got significant dysfunction, who've got their blood sugar out of whack, who've got type 2 diabetes, high triglycerides, low HDL, high blood pressure, and an increased weight size, all of that can be reversed.
What I love about this bit, the fix it bit, which I know you're going to go through, is they're all lifestyle changes. There is no surgery, there's no medication, we don't have to do anything dramatic, we just have to clean up our lifestyle in a few simple areas and our metabolic health will be tip-top.
Exactly right. So the first one, and the exciting thing for me is this is the big one, this is the big ticket item.
Yes.
You do this and within 4 weeks you can have significantly improved your metabolic health. And I'm talking 4 weeks. You may have had a lifetime of poor metabolic health, but within 4 weeks you can make a difference.
Absolutely.
That's
What
all
is
we're
it?
talking about. It is removing carbs and sugar.
Very simple.
This is what you hear us say all the time.
Change your fuel source.
Change your fuel sources. What we're going to do when we take away the carbohydrates and the sugar, we're going to remove the glucose from the body. And remember my description of the blood sugar issues. When we pile in glucose, to use that, the body needs insulin, and therefore the pancreas has to work really hard.
Yes.
If we simply cut off that glucose supply, then we can start immediately to bring down the blood sugar level. We can bring it back to a reasonable range. Now, if we're going to cut out the carbohydrate and sugar, hand in hand with that, we need to do something else, which is we need to replace that fuel source with an alternative.
Yes, which is our friend, the healthy fats.
It's the healthy fats. So take away the carbohydrate and sugar, all the processed foods, and bring in healthy fats from animal sources, things like butter, ghee, animal fat, perhaps avocados, olive oil, nuts, that sort of thing. Bring in the healthy fats, replace all your carbs with the healthy fats, and basically what that does is it switches the body. It's like getting a great big switch and pulling that big lever. Your body will then switch into a state of ketosis. And when we're in ketosis, the body takes the fat that you give it, the dietary fat, and it takes the fat that you've got stored, your body fat, and it burns both of those in the liver and it produces ketones. And the body uses those ketones for energy. Additional benefit, they are long-lasting, sustainable. You don't get the highs and the lows of carbohydrates, and we talk a lot about this. They are a wonderful, pure, clean fuel source. They'll make you feel amazing. Because your body's running so well, you'll feel energetic, energized,
all those things,
full of life.
So one of the first things you can do is follow the ketogenic, the carnivore, or the ketovore lifestyle, and any of those ways of eating will remove the unnecessary carbohydrates, remove most of the carbohydrates, and allow your body to switch to a different fuel source and address a lot of those metabolic issues.
Exactly right. So that's 4 weeks. We're talking about reversing type 2 diabetes. We're talking about reversing metabolic conditions in 4 weeks.
Fantastic.
With that single
No drugs,
step
no
alone.
surgery, no interventions, just changing your lifestyle.
Exactly right.
Next one.
Next one.
It's
Next
still
one is
part of the lifestyle piece, isn't it?
still part
Still
of the
part
lifestyle.
of the ketogenic carnivore piece.
It is. So the extension of pure keto carnivore eating or ketovore eating is then to restrict when you can eat.
Yes.
So what we might call intermittent fasting or time restricted eating. So here what we're talking about is instead of just feeding and grazing all day,
Yes.
we are going to give our body a rest.
Yes.
So in the same way that you go to bed and sleep at night, our digestion needs a rest. So we're going to restrict our food intake up to 16 hours a day. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow your body to burn through any glucose that's in your blood during those 16 hours.
Yes.
So we eat our last meal of the day, let's say in the evening, we stop feeding, we go overnight, we fast overnight, our body's chewing through whatever's left in our system, uses it up overnight, we keep the fast, so we keep going, we don't eat in the morning, perhaps go through till lunchtime, and during that period of time the body's nicely producing ketones and just getting rid of any glucose that, because we might have had a small amount of carbohydrates
absolutely.
and it will use all of those carbohydrates. What that's doing is it's improving our metabolic flexibility.
Yes.
And if we then add in an additional longer fast, so let's just say we've got into the ketovore, ketogenic or carnivore lifestyle, and we're doing really well and we're starting to get fat adapted and we've removed all our carbohydrates, and we just want to really make sure we're in ketosis and we're getting the therapeutic benefits.
Yes.
Because you really want the therapeutic levels of ketones, not the low levels. then you might do an extended fast for say 36 or 48 hours.
It's a full cleanse.
And that will really just burn through the last of the glucose in your system.
Yes.
It will get to the point where your cells actually start to renew. So the old damaged cells get sent away and new cells come in their place, and that's called autophagy. So the benefit of that is if you've got old and diseased cells, if you've got half cells, partial cells, those cells that could go on to become cancerous, you've got problem cells in your heart, this is going to sweep them out. It's going to clear them out.
The garbage collectors again.
Garbage collectors come in, take them all away.
Yep.
And then after your fast, you're growing new cells because you're giving your body beautiful, nutritious food that it can start to regenerate and get rid of all that disease.
So again, it's a lifestyle change. It is removing the carbs, removing the sugars through a change of how you eat, but also the extended fasting, intermittent fasting to remove all the glucose. The next one is removing another real nasty. And one of your faves, which is the old industrial seed oils.
It is. And, you know, we got industrial seed oils. They came to us actually by accident. Way back in the 1800s. When they
It's
were...
a fascinating story, this, isn't
It's a fascinating story, and we should do some more about this. But basically, when we were starting to get industrialised, we had a company who produced soap. And the reason it happened is because the cottonseed oil used to be used for lighting. So in our lamps in the houses, they used cottonseed oil. And around, I think it's about the 1860s, don't remember the exact date, they found oil. Right, so they discovered petroleum oil, natural oil. And so what that meant is they didn't need this cottonseed oil. They had a cheaper source, an easier source. And so they moved to using this petroleum-based oil. And so we had all this cottonseed oil. It basically went to waste, was labelled as toxic waste. And Procter & Gamble came along to soap manufacturers, and they said, well, we could make a different type of soap, because until that point, soap was made from pig fat. So not a lot of people realise that soap was originally from animal fat.
Right.
And they came along,
vegetarians.
That's right. They came along and said, hey, we could make soap from this cottonseed oil. It's all waste.
Yes.
So they started to do it, and they hydrogenated the oil, and that took it from a liquid into a solid, because that's what hydrogenation does. And that's done in a big chemical process. Along the way, they found out by accident, there was a guy in Germany actually who found that he could also make an edible oil using this hydrogenation process. Procter & Gamble bought the patent, actually bought the plant, and started to make an industrial seed oil that could be literally used to put in our food, to cook with. Now, originally, it was like a replacement for shortening, so it was a solid. And it was marketed as Crisco.
Right.
And they used it in pastry and baking products and that sort of thing.
I do remember the name.
So Crisco came along. They were very, very clever in their marketing. They gave away free cookbooks. And guess what was required in every single recipe?
I would say the oil that is made from soap and made from lamp oil that is poisonous but now repackaged as edible.
There you go. So Crisco, toxic waste, is now called for in every recipe, and it ended up in every household.
Fantastic.
And they then went on, very smart guys, they then went on and said, well, it'd be quite handy if we produced not only the solid form, but a nice liquid form.
Yes, a beautiful coloured liquid form that looks attractive.
We did. So we got this solid and we got the semi-solid, and we got, so the solid was the shortening, the semi-solid was the margarine, and the liquid was the stuff that you fried with. So you had whatever you wanted. There was an oil or fat which came from plants. So it was billed as a healthy oil.
Yes.
And when all the lipid hypothesis came out with people like Ansel Keys, and we got the advice, don't have saturated fat anymore, and everybody said, oh, best not eat animals, everyone turned to the plant fat. So we started taking in this industrial seed oil, and what we've seen ever since then is that the rate of heart disease, obesity, cancer, type 2 diabetes, and all of these metabolic conditions has risen exponentially.
Okay, so one of the areas that we focus on with metabolic health is to remove all industrial seed oils from our diet.
And they are cottonseed oil, canola oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, rapeseed oil, flaxseed oil, any of those. They are produced in industrial chemical processes by hydrogenation. They require chemicals and solvents to clean them up. and they are basically damaging to the metabolic system. And the reason they're damaging is because they contain very high levels of polyunsaturated fatty acids, puffers, or omega-6s, and our body isn't designed for that quantity of omega-6.
And while you're there, you can remove the soap. Don't eat soap.
Don't eat soap.
Don't eat
It's
gasoline.
not tasty.
Same, but different. But don't eat soap and gasoline because they're equally as toxic as the industrial seed oils. Brilliant. That doesn't scare the heck out of people. Don't rub it on your skin, vegans. Vegans, don't do it because there's pigs in there. Oink, oink. If you rub it on, it may affect your body size. No, don't go there. All right. Metabolic health, fix it. Exercise, movement. Why does it impact the metabolic health?
So again, if you think about a muscle, right?
Yes.
What do if you want to maintain that muscle strength and tone? You work it.
Absolutely.
You put it under pressure, you lift weights.
Yes.
So it's the same with our metabolic system. So if we think about at least a part of our metabolic system is our heart, our cardiovascular system, our respiratory system,
Yes.
we need to work it. So what we know is if we do some cardio exercise, maybe some high intensity exercise, that is going to work the metabolic health or improve the metabolic health. And again, with lifting weights, building muscle, building tone, it's all going to help our metabolic health. Probably not as much as the first four interventions we talked about.
It's certainly a contributor.
But it's certainly a contributor. So, you can have good metabolic health and not exercise.
Yes.
But it's a lot better for your overall body, your overall system, if you do exercise, because we know it contributes to good health.
And if you're changing your lifestyle, it would seem to be a very smart move to include some type of movement, not just for the metabolic health, but for all the other wellness benefits as well.
Exactly. And I will just say, you can't just exercise and not do the rest.
Nice try, people.
That's it. So if you were thinking, well, I don't want to change my diet.
I'll just eat soap and exercise.
I enjoy my processed soap. And I'll just do a bunch of exercise.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
It's not going to work.
No.
It's definitely not going to work. It's not enough.
And you can't just do the last one by itself because the last one is sleep.
The last one is sleep.
You can't just sleep lots more and get better health. But why is sleep an important contributor to good metabolic health?
Because when we're sleeping, our body's basically repairing itself. It's restoring. All of those cells are renewing. Our nutrients are getting taken up. All of those hormonal processes are working and active. So if we go to bed at the right time, get up at the right time, sleep for the right amount of time, get deep sleep, get REM sleep, all of those body's metabolic systems can do what they're meant to do at the right time. The hormones can be produced, they can be transported, they can be used, and any damage that's been caused in the body, whether it's from food or exercise or stress, all of that can be repaired, and we can basically get ourselves well simply by sleeping. So if you want to make sure your metabolic health is in good condition, then it really is the last piece of the jigsaw. Do everything else, but if you neglect your sleep, you actually still could be at risk of type 2 diabetes because your body's under stress. You could still be at risk of cancer because you're not giving your body a chance to get rid of damaged cells.
Yes.
You could still be at risk for things like heart disease because, again, your body's not doing all of its repair processes. So to make sure that you're reducing the stress on the body, giving it a chance to repair and recover, you need to get good sleep. And you especially will not lose weight, at least not to the extent that you need, if you're not getting good sleep.
And we've got episodes on all of those things, especially sleep, because it's a big area for people to be aware of. So we started today talking about the importance of metabolic health, and one of the things you said early on was we don't necessarily have the awareness because we don't see externally metabolic health, but we do know statistically that a huge percentage of people metabolic health is not where it needs to be. 5 areas to monitor, measure and manage. And if we understand each of those 5 areas and measure them regularly, we can control, we at least understand where our health sits. And then the fix it is really just lifestyle change. So it's actually a very simple fix. And a lot of it aligns to a lot of the people tuning in, which is the ketogenic or the ketovore lifestyle. A few simple changes and your metabolic health could be in great shape.
In great shape.
Fascinating.
And fast. Remember that within 30 days, you can start to reverse these conditions and get yourself back to good health.
You'll be younger, taller, richer, all those things. Everything gets better. So fascinating information. I really think a lot of people will appreciate it. And again, those people tuning in, if you have any questions specific to your metabolic health, please fire them through. We'd love to answer them and help you out. Join us again on the next Peaks Live episode.
That's it. And find us on Facebook, because if you have got questions, if you pop them on Facebook, send us a message. We will reply to you personally, and we will give you the help and support you need.
You might join our Facebook group, which is a secret Facebook group where we talk about special things that no one else gets to hear about. So if you want to know about that, ask us. We'll let you in.